2025 was a record year for me. I ended up doing twice as well as 2024, where I finished up for the firm around 13 million. One of the biggest benefits of being involved in so many different market environments, right? You had a crashing market, a 50 VIX market, a small cap market, a swing market. There are definitely going to be slow weeks, slow months, slow years, and I don't want to get burnt out because things get boring.
Hello, and welcome to the Trader's Journey for Investors Underground. In this episode, it's an honor to be joined by Max Ganik, senior trader at SMB Capital. Max did not simply find himself trading for a living. This was an expected journey. Max was obsessed with the stock markets from an early age. And while most kids might have been focused on cartoons or video games, Max was studying the markets, getting real-world experience, and setting himself up to realize his dreams. In this episode, we'll explore Max's journey, from the desire to trade as a teenager to finding himself on the hottest prop firm desk in New York City. Then we'll dig into the practical side, where he finds edge in the markets, builds a playbook, how he recovers from drawdowns, and many more tips that you could use and apply in your trading. It's my honor to introduce Max Ganik. Hello, Max. Thanks for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Max, I got to see you speak at Traders for a Cause last year, and I've heard so much about you. Obviously through Mike Bellafiore, he's been on the show. He had great things to say about you. So really glad that you were able to make it and being willing to come on the show. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Max, we're recording this in January of 2026. So, first off, Happy New Year to you.
Thanks, you as well.
Yeah. I saw a lot of people posting their sort of retrospectives, their end of year for 2025. And so I wanted to just start with that. How was your 2025? What did that look like for you?
Absolutely. I mean, 2025 was a record year for me. I ended up doing twice as well as 2024, where I finished up for the firm around 13 million. An absolutely crazy number, especially only 5 years into my career. I'd say that last year truly provided incredible opportunities you could think about, from the, the market crash for the whole tariff situation, to swing longs in the AI sectors and names. Truly just absolutely phenomenal opportunities. I think just reflecting back on the year, thinking about how pushing on all of those A+ opportunities and then throughout the year sizing up was what truly made it a very special year.
That's incredible. And congratulations on such a milestone and such a great year. That's awesome to hear.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, what are you looking forward to in 2026? How does a trader coming off of such a spectacular year start thinking about the new year? Because I would imagine there's part of you that knows better than to just, double the number. How do you think about all of that?
Absolutely. Well, I think that for me this year, it really is still about pushing size on those best opportunities and just sort of laying low in between. I found that all throughout my career, that when there's really no A+ opportunities, I find myself kind of stressed out. I'm not really enjoying the job. I find myself really pushing when I shouldn't be doing so. And I think that last year was one of those kind of turning points for me, where when things slow down, I slowed down as well. And that really allowed me to avoid drawdowns and push size for those best opportunities. So we'll see this year. Is it going to be a crazy year? Is it going to be a dull year, or somewhere in the middle? I think that staying out of trouble during those slower times and really trying to push myself as much as possible in those best opportunities is going to be how I grade myself for the year.
Max, can you talk a little bit about your background and, how did you first hear about the stock market and trading? Because from what I understand, you've known for a long time that you were interested in the markets.
Absolutely. So, when I was only like 8 or 9, my parents just like showed me the basics of the market. It wasn't, like too, like crazy back then. It was just understanding what is a stock, all those like usual things. And I sort of just kind of dabbled from there and just was like following just like news and individual stocks. And then once I was in ninth grade was when I started to actually actively trade. And that was when I really knew that this was something that interested me. From that point on, I began trading options, which for the first like few years was extremely volatile and definitely gave me a lot of learning lessons. I made money, I lost a lot of money, but those times really prepared me for what this job is now, both from a knowledge point of view, but also from a psychological point of view as well.
So, were you trading options as early as, say, your teenage years? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'd say my late teenage years. Although the strategies that I was doing back then were super basic, just like your very plain vanilla, long call, long put, spreads. Right now, we definitely do a lot of different style trading. And obviously, once I started at the firm, just like my entire playbook changed as well, as did like the market, right? Trading 2015 or 2013, right, is a completely different environment than 2020 and after. So really things have definitely changed, but the lessons and just kind of that base level knowledge did stick with me.
At the early age, were you reading books? Were you talking to people in person to sort of cultivate this interest in the markets?
Yeah, so I was in a trading chat room, a options one specifically, and that's where kind of a lot of the idea generation came up. I'd say that the way that I educated myself was one through practice and just exploration of strategies rather than books and stuff. I find that what really interests me is kind of that idea generation part of trading, and that did start early on, beyond just like your base level, knowledge of just kind of like what options are, like what, just like stocks are. After that was really more just kind of hands-on learning.
Did you go to school with a focus on the markets, business or economics or something like that, knowing that you wanted to pursue this further?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Michigan, where I graduated with a business degree, a BBA. So I knew that I wanted to be involved in the stock market, although I wasn't sure exactly what avenue. So what I mean by that is, at first I thought I was going to go through a sales and trading route, so through a big bank, and then from there just kind of go to a hedge fund or something like that. I wasn't sure if I wanted to take the more like risky approach in going to prop trading, obviously because there's no base salary, and if things go wrong, there's a bigger downside. And then after doing a internship in sales and trading, I realized that it wasn't for me, and that what really made me love the market was being able to put on my own trades and being kind of more, just like hands on in the business. So in my senior year, that's when I approached SMB, and it was a great fit, and the rest is, history basically.
Absolutely. What was that first year like for you? Because everybody has a little bit of a different first type of year trading, and you obviously came in with a background in trading. So, what was that year like?
So the first month was slow, right? This was 1 month before COVID. And basically from mid February on, things just became crazy. Every day was super volatile. And one of the biggest benefits of being involved in so many different like market environments, right? You had a crashing market, a 50 VIX market, a small cap market, a swing market, everything really in, the first 4 or 5 months. And that allowed us to develop so many strategies so early on to grow from. I'd say that just kind of my nature as a trader is, it's more short term. It's more high leverage situations when putting on big risk with like really good risk rewards. And when you have that kind of volatile environment, those strategies really do shine. So being able to grow risk extremely quickly because the opportunities were there, and also because kind of the edge was very clearly presented.
Yeah, absolutely. And 2020 was absolutely a phenomenal year to begin trading. And so, what was the difference like for you, having experience trading on your own versus trading at the firm?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is actually being surrounded by like-minded, individuals where you can grow as a team and you can create strategies, as a group very quickly. Like we would be nonstop, like discussing trades and going over, approaches for getting in various opportunities. I also think that having a risk management system where you know that you owe, a responsibility to the firm, obviously to yourself as well for being smart and growing your career. But having that structure, I think, really kind of takes away that blow up risk. The thing, about trading on your own, especially from a early age where you're just going to be a more volatile person by nature, is that if you don't have those firm like risk structures in place, then that's potentially where you can get into trouble. So really starting out with those firm like risk guidelines and a team of very successful people really just kind of set me up for a success.
Was it a relief to find people, around your same age that were just as interested in stocks as you were? Because I'd imagine in your teenage years, other teenagers might not have been into the market that kind of way.
No, they definitely weren't. Yeah, I mean, it definitely made the job fun, right? Like trading didn't feel and doesn't feel like a job, except when you lose money. But uh, I'd say that being able to be on the trading floor with a bunch of guys, right, who are all your age, it feels like you're just kind of having fun, and you're learning, and it's a really great environment. I'd also say that just kind of fitting my like personality is that it didn't feel super like corporate, right? It's not like you're in some big bank and then everything is very structured. You gotta watch like what you say, um, all those like sorts of things. It was a enjoyable climate to grow both as a person but also as a trader.
If you're looking for ways to take your trading to the next level, Investors Underground might be able to help. You'll have access to courses and mentors to learn from, some of the best technology available for scanning stocks and breaking news, and access to the chat rooms, where you'll find a vibrant community of focused traders who share their trade ideas in real time each day. Members have access to the morning broadcasts, where the IU moderators share their trade ideas for the day ahead during the pre-market session. Members also have access to the midday study sessions, where they can review trades, ask questions, and receive real-time feedback in a group setting. Nightly watch lists with stocks and trade plans for the upcoming sessions, trade recaps where moderators share their execution and outcomes, and all the other tools and resources that Investors Underground has to offer. Listeners of the Trader's Journey can access exclusive membership deals available at investorsunderground.com/journey. And now, back to our episode with Max Ganik. What would you say in terms of, being able to review for the day or for the week? What does that review process look like? How do you think about your day when you're reviewing it more than just P&L? How do you look at whether a day was good or bad? What's that process like for you?
Absolutely. So a big part of our day is being on audio, and a lot of that a review comes through discussion with those guys on call. I mean, like we're speaking for hours per day. So in real time, we're going over prior trades from the day, trades that are live, potential like trades that are setting up. So it's kind of just this like nonstop review process. And there's obviously the general like review, like where you would go back and just like go through like charts, and that's stuff like that. But I think that having that group that you can constantly go back and forth, especially so soon after a opportunity, is one of the most beneficial things. At least it's been for me.
How would you describe your trading style and where you find edge in the markets, maybe throughout your time at the firm?
Yeah, so I'd say that earlier on it was more scalp focused, right? It's also because small caps were, at least for me, a lot more in play than they are now. Right now, I'd say that most of the trades that I'm focused on, I'd say 90% are on large cap names and themes. I'd say that when I'm trading size on a small cap, it's kind of your like special situation. Think about a beyond, right? Like the one, two, or three names of the year that truly offer something crazy. That's where I find edge in small caps, unless there's like news. But I think that now, especially as I've, like sized up, right? There's not the same liquidity for those scalps, and also like the market, like, it's obviously changed since 2020 and 21. Like the volume's not exactly the same, and volatility is changed as well as themes and strategies. But now I'd say it's more so on idea trading, very much focused on option trading, swing trading if the market is appropriate, but that goes in waves. And then special, like situation breaking news.
What sort of percentage would you say, if you had to break down your trading, is it like 50-50 intraday swing? And in terms of the instruments that you're using, is it like 50-50 options and equities? What does that all look like in that breakdown for you?
Yeah. So I'd say it's probably 50-50 between um, intraday and ideas that play out overnight or through like more than one day. But typically it's not going to be more than like 1 or 2 days. But, just like sometimes there is setting up trades for a multi-day move and stuff like that. But besides that, I'd say that I'm probably at least 75% plus on the option side, because almost all of those bigger trades are done on the option side, or at least had some sort of an option component. The stuff on the stock side would be small caps, would be imbalances, would be breaking news sometimes, scalp, stuff like that. But, it really depends on kind of what the year is. Like, for example, if this year is going to be more of a range bound year where it's just going to be small scalps each day, then that would probably go back towards like 50-50. If we're going to be in a year where there's crazy like large cap opportunities and trends, it would probably be like 90-10, right? So it really depends, but it's definitely a lot more, heavy towards the option side.
Is there one particular strategy or setup that gets you like the most excited because you're comfortable with it, like a sort of A plus strategy, whether it's like a mean reversion or, like a momentum play? Is there anything in particular that gets you the most excited?
I think that anytime you have a parabolic chart or a capitulation, so like multiple days in a row, a mega volume, those are just the most fun setups because it's such clear edge. And when you have that kind of volume, you really can feel confident once you're right. Um, those have definitely been some of the best trades for us over the last couple of years, and truly sometimes like set up the most psychotic opportunities on the option side. You can have days where it's a Friday, you're up 3-4 days into it, you gap up, you turn, or vice versa. And those are option days where you can make 10, 20x. Stuff like that. I mean, I think those are definitely trades that you live for on the option side. So.
How much of your trading is, based on written rules, like in a playbook, where something is very meticulously, laid out and you've studied it over and over versus sort of a gut feeling, or some people might call it intuition in trading? How do you think about those two types of, decisions to put on risk?
Yeah, so I would say that for me, the baseline is kind of those like written rules, but everything past there is gut feel and intuition. Especially on the option side, there's a lot like more to it than just like, just like written guidelines. It's what does the vol look like? Where do you think that the stock can go? What do you feel about the volume? What does like the market feel like? Is this the right, environment? There's obviously a stats part to, each trade. So for example, a mean reversion trade, there's going to be a stats part where you're like, okay, it's up like this much in 3 days. So it's a great trade. Or it's going to be a breakdown trade, and it's going to be a very clear level. But I think that, when it comes down for sizing, that truly is, intuition trade, right? Like, for example, for me, putting on A risk is probably 3 or 4 times the amount of putting on B risk. There's no clear thing that is going to tell me, if that should be A risk, but do I feel that this opportunity justifies kind of like making that big jump? And that just comes from my experience in similar trades and just kind of how I read the market opportunity.
How do you think about what makes an A grade trade? How do you think about what makes a B grade trade? Is it just the parameters of risk to reward? Do you also think about like what your history with those types of trades is? Is it a mix of all those?
Volume, daily levels, and risk reward is kind of the three biggest factors. The greater the RVOL, the more in play it is. So therefore, there's a better chance of you being right. Daily levels offer you a very clear inflection point where, especially from the options side, you can expect a big move. And risk reward, that's everything. Could you get involved at like the right time of day? For example, if you're doing the option trade, if you're putting it let's say on a Friday morning, right? Are you putting it on at 9:35 or 11 a.m.? There's a very different risk reward like structure from the option side for both of those. So thinking about all three like factors, are super critical. I think that when actually diving deep into a trade, especially because so much of the trade is from the option side, if for example it's only going to be a stock trade, those probably are not going to move into the A category just because I don't have the same level of edge structuring a stock risk reward unless it's like a breaking news trade or is an excellent like risk reward as I do on the option side, right? So just like my like level of edge in structuring the options trade is so much better. So therefore, for me to risk the same on a stock entry like versus the option like wouldn't make sense. So that's why for the most part, A's are reserved for option structures. C's are really for me just kind of getting involved and could many times be starter trades. If let's say I think something could set up, I want to build in and like pyramid into a trade, that could be a C. It also could be like me just kind of testing out a new strategy or just kind of, just like feeling something out. Just for like round numbers, right? If let's say my C risk is 1,000, I'd say that my B risk is 5,000 and my, A risk is 25,000, right? So when I'm still taking these C trades, these are not going to be trades that are going to, move like the needle that much, but they are definitely either like learning experiences or sometimes those C's could become B's and potentially even A's if things truly set up right. So I still find them to be valuable, but they definitely have to be significantly sized down so that way I don't like look back at the end of the month and say, wow, I lost 3 stops on C trades. That was awful, right? So definitely have to be very careful.
Yeah, and that answered one of the questions I was going to ask, which is, are there C trades or B trades that eventually do come up in the ranks and become A style trades for you?
Absolutely. I think that that comes with experience and also just kind of like refining, a playbook. I think that the thing that I've done the best is probably those like A- trades becoming A+ trades and really just kind of figuring out what exact like moments I can really size up because like once I'm in the A's, this is when that is a trade that could like make my month or make my quarter, right? And really finding ways to make those trades extra special is how I'm going to do really well. There's never really going to be a point where a C trade is going to be the reason why I had a great month. But there's absolutely going to be a reason as to why maybe I really pushed on that A trade that, I potentially put up a record number. Like, for example, like last year, there were absolutely multiple trades where I really pushed on some of those best opportunities. And, instead of, let's say, like making 200 or 300 on an A trade, that was 600, 700 plus. And that like difference right there is so much greater than trying to squeeze out every dollar, like scalping on a C trade. When things are slow, I'm probably moving, I don't know, 5, 10K like per day, maybe 25, 30, and I'm struggling for that. So for me to try and push and potentially cause harm when I'm trying to just eke out the extra 5K is not really worth that. Whereas instead I could be using that like risk and waiting for that opportunity where potentially that A trade of using that same risk could give me a 5, 10, a 15R, right? With a much higher degree of confidence.
When you think about your career so far, are there any sort of like milestone or trades in particular that stick out to you as being really important kind of milestones for your trading career?
Absolutely. I think that in July of 2021 was kind of like my first big swing trade. It was on Amazon. It was a weekend trade. I think I made around 250 on that, and it was a great call. It was basically a breakout anticipation, and I structured the options very well on that. That kind of ignited my swing trading business. In 22, kind of the Chinese stocks capitulation. That was basically my first like seven-figure trade. I was just shy. I think I made like 850 on that. And then I'd say the regional banks. From mid 22 actually up until early 23, I was in a drawdown with the firm, and doing like really well on those regional banks got me out of my drawdown. So I was definitely in a rut, and being able to do well in those situations kind of reignited me and kind of got me back to life, so to speak, right? Besides that, 24 was a very good swing year. That's kind of like when the whole AI stuff started and semis. Also, it offered incredible mean reversion trades. And I think that incorporating that into my playbook was essential, as there's been like many of those trades since then. 25 was excellent for breaking news opportunities and also for structuring idea trades. I probably put on the most idea trades last year versus just very clear technical setups. And that's something that I think was very beneficial last year and will be going forward. Just a different way about going about a trade and expanding my playbook in a positive EV way. And then also really just kind of like sizing up those best opportunities.
Can you talk a little bit about the amount of work that it takes to build a playbook to begin with, let alone how you would expand it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that each strategy is differently. For example, when I was building out a small cap playbook when I started, that didn't take that long, right? There was so many opportunities that within the first week you can figure out, okay, I'm doing really well at this style trade. This like makes sense. What sort of structure makes sense? If you're doing a swing playbook, that maybe takes a little bit longer as you have to see like multiple different market opportunities. Like for example, you can have the exact same technical structure and volume in two different like market climates, and they'll give you the exact opposite like, result. You doing swing trading in 22 versus you doing swing trading in 24, you're going to get wildly different results. So like that takes time. Actually, like living through those like market climates, you may be lucky, and that only takes 6 months to a year if the market has like different cycles throughout the year, or that could take you 3, 4 years before you actually like realize, or you can, interpret how to properly do swing trading, right? In different, cycles. I would say that for me, the longest that it's taken to build a playbook, and I still am, is probably on the idea trades because it's the least structured, right? Those are potentially more, options trades where I'm sizing those to zero, or they are multi-week ideas, or they are just general trade because I like a stock at a certain price. Like those are variables that take longer to develop size, right? So each strategy will be very different, and part of it is also going to be luck, just on kind of where we are in the market cycle and the opportunity level.
Max, you've talked a bit about the power of learning and growing as a team and training with others, bouncing ideas off of one another. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of learning from others throughout your career?
Absolutely. So I think that the biggest thing is being able to gain a level of confidence in a trade by speaking with other people, right? Being able to discuss what like specific variables turn that trade from a B into an A. There are absolutely trades where I thought potentially it was a much better opportunity than it truly was, or vice versa. And there's also, especially when you're doing a lot of options trading, how do you properly structure it? Which options trade do you do? What expiration and why? Those are all things that through like discussion can really add a lot of edge. For example, if let's say we're trying to structure a mean reversion trade, or it's the morning and we want to figure out how do we get into a option, a zero DTE or something like that, or it's a swing trade. This takes a lot of discussion beforehand. Like if we're going to be putting on a swing trade at the close, we're probably starting to discuss it at like 2 p.m., right? I also think that a lot of the strategies that I developed, I partially learned from other people, right? You discuss and you learn things from others, but then you could take that and kind of put like your own like twist in it, right? It's like the more information that you take in, the more that like that's naturally just going to spur idea generation, on your own. Like for example, the guys that I work with, they were kind of like the first ones that were really doing swing trading, and then I kind of added my own twist, and you know then like someone else, they kind of like structured a certain way to get involved in those trades. And then let's say for breaking news trading, right? It's just like similar like variables there. It really, as long as you're not divulging edge, I think outside the group, right? That can be dangerous. But as long as you are kind of in a tight, knit group where basically everyone is assisting everyone, right? It's going to be a two-way street. Then I think that in the long run, you'll find that it's a very big positive for your career.
What does it look like trading inside of your pod? Is this a just a continuous stream of dialogue going on throughout the day? Or is it, centered around certain hours?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that we jump on. It depends if the market is doing much in PM, but from like basically like the market open until the close, I'd say that when things are slow, it's just five guys just choking around and just having fun. When it's serious, it's 5 6 hours of us just kind of nonstop going over like trade ideas, situations in which we would get into a trade. If let's say this, then do this, right? It's constantly just a back and forth, and being able to vocalize those like trade ideas is super beneficial, right? Because like if you're just like sitting there, right, sometimes the best way to think about new ideas is by actually discussing it, right? It's like the same way how like people say when they want to, I don't know, like generate ideas, they write them down, right? So that way they can actually, just like visualize it. Well, for us, it's the same thing, kind of just like speaking that into existence, right? So most days that are slow, or that I think will be slow, I start out like the morning with basically zero ideas, and somehow the whole day we spend hours like discussing trades. If I was just sitting there by myself, I would not be doing that. I probably would look, for an hour, like, okay, maybe this, maybe that, and that's it, right? But by like sitting there and having basically five people jump starting conversation, that's how you can potentially walk into the next great trade.
Absolutely. It sounds also like a good way to prevent boredom trades.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, things can definitely get like boring when you're sitting there. I usually work out in the middle of the day just to kind of separate out like the morning session and the afternoon. I also find that it's really beneficial for me to clear, like my head and just kind of finish out strong. Obviously, if things are super active, I'll go in the after hours, but I get bored, especially in slow markets, right? So being able to, just like joke around and just basically just like chill while still being like fully like zoned in case something does come up is what kind of like makes like the day go by and like not as brutal of a way, right? I mean, just for slow days, if I was just like sitting there for 6 7 hours, I would hate this job. And like there are definitely going to be slow weeks, slow months, slow years, and I don't want to get burnt out because things get boring. I also know that if you're super bored, you're more likely to kind of just like make up fake trades, right? So avoiding that, because it's not hard to, in my eyes, when the market is constantly providing edge, and things are super active, it's not hard to do well. Sometimes you can feel like frustrated because you should have like made more, but it's not to the point in which you can't make money. It's those like periods where things are super slow, where you can end up significantly harming yourself. Because if you were to get into a drawdown because things were so boring, you just kind of kept putting on bad trades. Well, now if you had just used that risk, right, and you waited a few weeks or a few months for that next huge opportunity, that could be a game changer for your career. Instead of that trade in a few months from now getting you back to break even, you could be using that trade to then just like size up, even more. I mean, this genre really is a domino effect when it comes down towards risk. One big trade allows you to size up, for like the next big trade. Just like last year, doing really well from April through June, with all the headlines and stuff, that is what kind of allowed me to size up like the summer and fall, right? Because I was building up my risk, and if I had gone into that period in a bad situation, then I wouldn't have been able to have sized up in summer and fall, and then overall, like last year would have been significantly lower. So really, just kind of being in check and just like making sure that you don't fall into badly, like habits when things are slow. And just to summarize, being, or speaking with like people that can also hold you accountable is super beneficial.
Absolutely. I think it's important for people to hear that you can actually go take a break, take a walk, exercise, keep your hands off the buttons, and that's what professional traders will be doing as well. I think that's good
Absolutely.
confirmation. One of the things I wanted to ask you as well, Max, is about the less fun parts of trading, related to all of this, and that's drawdowns. Everybody will essentially go through a drawdown at some point. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's part of the business here. So, you know, how does one recover from a drawdown? That could be a very negative space for a lot of people, rightfully so. What would be your advice for anybody listening who's going through a drawdown, hoping to come out of it?
Yeah, so in 2022, basically from July through September, I lost around 1.2 mil with the firm. And it was obviously super stressful. Like the market went from a crazy like momentum market to being absolutely dead, right? You went through kind of like a big like bear market, and I had not gone through that sort of environment. Um, I think that the first thing that kind of put me at ease was finally when I put in a low and started to build back up. Many times, being down 700 versus like 900, like you're not going to feel super different. But once you are at like 900, being back at 700, feeling like you stopped the bleeding, um, is felt kind of like such a relief that you can now build on that. So what I would say is if you find yourself in a bad situation, just try and put up a green trade. Try and follow a correct process, because once you are in a better like mental state, the good trades will just come and you'll be able to do much better on the following ones. But being in a bad psychological state, you are more than likely going to keep screwing up trades unless you somehow get super lucky. And like this is a long-term game. Whether or not you potentially undersize like one opportunity, it's not going to be the be all and end all. But trying to fix bad habits as soon as possible will be the key to success. Obviously, drawdowns are the worst part of it, right? I definitely had those existential questions of, okay, I did super well for 2 years. Is that it? Is the market going to be slow? Are my strategies like not that viable? But you do grow. And I especially went through a drawdowns even before being here at SMB. This was obviously the most like significant, but I think that they do allow you to grow. They do allow you to handle risk, and part of sizing up and putting on real size is being comfortable seeing those bigger numbers. So it is kind of a means to the end situation, as long as you learn from it and as long as you adapt. Which sounds very cliche, but it's a lot, easier said than done.
Could you give someone some advice in terms of like, they're coming back from a drawdown and they're really eager to start pressing the buttons and try to, cut that drawdown in half? What advice would you give someone who just wants, to make it back quickly?
I'd say that really focus on just your absolute best trades and try to eliminate everything else, right? Which may take a little bit extra patience, but if you know that you have like a set of strategies that are very successful, it makes the most sense for you to basically eliminate the waste, so that way you don't get yourself in bigger trouble. Like most likely, if you get into a drawdown, it's not because you lost on like 3 straight A trades. Just like because what like makes an A trade is that you have a very good win rate. So either just like mathematically, it's a anomaly, or you were losing it by sizing up B and C trades that like you shouldn't have. So the first thing to do is to stop doing those B and C trades, right? And just like focus on the ones that you have the greatest chance of being successful at. And then those A trades also will typically give you the best risk reward and potentially give you the biggest jump start. And then once you do have that jump start, it's probably when you'll start thinking clearer and everything will start flowing better as well.
Max, you've talked a little bit about psychology, publicly. Can you talk a little bit here about how important psychology is for you and how you notice it in your trading?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that being in a good like mental space is everything. I think that, for example, right, when I think that there's really incredible like feedback loops when you are in a trade, and sometimes that can give you the best answer. So, for example, if let's say I'm in a B or C trade and I'm sizing it up for some reason when I shouldn't, usually I will get extra nervous in those situations, and that's kind of that feedback loop saying, "What are you doing? This is not worth it." I typically don't really find myself to be nervous in A trades. I find myself to be more excited, and in the situation in which that A trade goes wrong, I'm not really that upset. I'm frustrated because I mean, like no one likes to lose money, but it's not really going to do a psychological hit. And that feedback loop, by being very comfortable in that risk, is also probably what is justifying you putting on that risk. And when you are in the right mental state, you are more likely to trade that setup correctly. And that is super key, key. I think that from a psychological point of view, outside of that, just really just like making sure that you are fully aware of how you are doing, whether or not that's personally, whether or not that's in the job. Trading without a clear mind is extremely detrimental. And this can especially be the case during a drawdown. I find that if, let's say, I'm going through a frustrating period, sometimes even just kind of taking like the middle of the day off, like there's nothing more frustrating than kind of putting on stupid trades and then like losing an extra 20, 30 grand. And even if, let's say, that doesn't, impact the year, right? Just like for me, in terms of like the grand scheme of things, that could double how shitty of a mood, I feel, right? And that mood could then potentially hurt me on that like next trade if I'm just carrying over this bad mood, right? So really doing everything possible to be in the right like mental state. Part of what is beneficial for me is obviously working with, people, right? Being able to be on call and to have those like less serious moments, as well as kind of use like my peers as kind of a support network, has enabled me to really bounce back after bad moments that I can promise you would not be the case if it was just me sitting by myself and not speaking with anyone. So just like things like that.
Do you perform sort of like mental check-ins just to make sure, you're doing okay, everything is even keel and you're, free from distractions and sort of a bad mental space? Is that something that you consciously do throughout the day?
I think that everyone just kind of just like naturally speaks to themselves. I would say that for me, it's kind of more of a subconscious thing and just a realization. I actually find that going and working out like midday, that for me is a great point of a reflection, because either I'm probably going there because like the market was dead, or there was a really good trade that's now done, or there was a really bad trade and I need a break, and all three of those kind of offer me a point of a reflection where I could speak to myself. So if, let's say, for you it's not working out midday, or that comes to after hours or in the morning, finding some activity where you can kind of speak to like yourself, or just kind of go through like your thoughts, is definitely super beneficial.
And is there anything that you do outside of working out to keep you, in a good mental space, make sure that your psychology is where it needs to be to perform at an optimal level?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that I live a pretty active social life. I think that having that kind of work-life balance is super key. On the weekends, I'm going out here in the city, seeing friends, seeing family, and really just trying to enjoy life. I think that having that separation is super critical, because one, you still want to enjoy life, whether or not things are going well or poorly, but also you want to speak with like people, just from a performance like point of view, speak with people outside of kind of like your close like network in trading is very beneficial, right? Like you want to have different like perspectives. It can be therapeutic just speaking with other people, but also it's fun, right? I mean, at this point in my life, like I have multiple goals. You know, just like living a fun social life is also what allows me to do well and feel motivated to do, or to perform at work.
You kind of touched on there on pretty much my last question for this section, which is, what are your long-term goals in trading? Are there any milestones or things like that that you want to tick off the, as a to-do kind of bucket list, or, are you still just figuring that out as it comes?
I mean, obviously, there are certain goals in what you want to make. I think that at this point, it's not as much as though I need to hit a certain number, as though is the feeling of success with it, right? Because like this job, like really is just kind of a stats game in terms of what did you risk, and then like how did you perform, right? And I think just kind of accomplishing more, improving my process, and feeling proud of basically my work product, which is my trades. Um, I think that's kind of what drives everyone, is the feeling of growth. If you just kind of instantly became a billionaire, you would feel great probably for a month, but then you would like naturally want something else. You would want to feel that like that like feeling of success, and like what's next, right? So really just striving to grow and become the best, trader that, I can possibly be. So that way each year I can look back at my accomplishments and feel proud of the work that I've done.
That's great. And Max, if it's okay with you, I'd love to end the episode with sort of a lightning round set of questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Awesome. The first question is, what do you consider to be your greatest strength as a trader?
I would say aggression.
What is the most difficult thing to overcome, you think, for traders?
I think when starting out, trying to remove yourself from thinking about like the value of like the money that like you're actually trading, because like you like start out and you're like, wow, that's 5 grand, that's a ton, and really trying to just like think of it as like a job and like points or just like whatever it is, so that way you can grow, is super critical.
If you could go back and meet your teenage self who was interested in the markets and give him one piece of advice based on what you know now, what would it be? And do you think you would have listened?
I'd say take it a little less seriously and enjoy the process more.
If you could give one piece of advice to new traders struggling to reach profitability, what would it be?
Focus, or just like narrow down your focus and just try and focus on the absolute best opportunities.
For traders who are doing extremely well right now in 2025, 2026, what advice would you give to them?
Basically, like the same advice that I would give like myself is it's just really not falling into those pitfalls of trading bad on opportunities, or trying to push just for the sake of pushing. Size up like the best opportunities, but just you know stay on the sidelines, need be.
Is there one particular tool that you find extremely useful for you in your trading?
Probably Bloomberg.
And for those interested in learning more about you, how can they do so?
The only thing that I really do that is, I'd say, like public, is I do a option webinar with SMB in their inside access course every Friday, basically for like 30 minutes. We go over the top 2 trades from the week, and just kind of overall just like general thoughts. I'll walk through them, answer questions, and just kind of give like my thoughts on that week's trading.
Awesome. Well, Max, thank you so much for taking the time to record this episode with me. It's been a real pleasure getting to chat with you and learn about your trading journey and how you approach the market. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was great being here.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of The Trader's Journey. We have additional episodes we believe you might also like, so don't forget to subscribe. You'll be notified of upcoming releases the moment they're available. Thanks for tuning in.